Shannon Miller, welcome to the Powerhouse Women Show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Well, Shannon, I want to get into your coverage and about the Super Bowl because it was really, unbelievable. But before we jump into that, so that
Sure.
everyone knows who you are, let's start first with if you could share a little bit more about your current role that you're in now and who you serve.
Absolutely. So I am Shannon Miller. I am the managing editor of Creator Economy and DEI at Adweek. In my current role, I oversee coverage that lands in those three very critical areas of the marketing ecosystem. So when it comes to who I serve, that's definitely like a double prong question. Adweek at large serves the marketing ecosystem. So everyone that sort of falls under that very, very large, overwhelming umbrella is who we serve as a unit. As an individual editor, I am somebody who is closely connected to the creative side, obviously, of marketing. So I feel that while I always serve the marketer and the marketing decision makers, my coverage specifically serves creatives,
Mhm.
creators, anyone who has any sort of passing interest in marketing and wants to better understand the areas that closely connect with consumers and culture. That is who I intend to reach out to.
Well, all right. Now let's because you've got such a wonderful perspective on the Super Bowl. I first have to
Mm.
say I cannot believe that I saw when the article came out that
Oh boy.
you published after the Super Bowl with your assessment of the ads. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm astonished at how quickly you synthesized the all of those ads to kind of pull out which were the top I think you had a top 10 list of
Mhm.
for that article, and it came out after the Super Bowl because you had to wait till all the commercials aired.
Yeah, that is a Herculean effort just to get it up. I mean, we have a little bit of help. Luckily, as a journalist, we are in this time where you can kind of early. There's obviously this general excitement of seeing the ads in real time, seeing it, how it sort of fits
Mhm.
into the overall game and overall play. But we have the opportunity to see a good majority of them ahead of time, so you get a sense of what's going to come out on top and what's going to kind of fall by the wayside. But there is also this added element of we don't get everything in time, or we don't
Mhm.
get everything ahead of time.
Mhm.
We actually ran into probably more surprises this year than we have in recent years, just because agencies, but brands are wanting to sort of keep that thing closer to the chest now because they've got some really
Mhm.
grand surprises. So you have an idea, you go in with this idea of what's going to come out on top, and something can change that entirely.
Mhm.
For instance, like going in, my favorite ad I think was Workday. That was the one with all of the rock stars
Mhm.
going railing against the overuse of the word rock star in corporate spaces, which I get and I'm guilty of. But then all of a sudden, Tubi came out of nowhere with this really this thing that kind of tricked America. And it was such a unique use of that time slot that it totally threw our countdown for a loop. So we had to discuss that in real time, figure out
Mhm.
what we are going to say, figure out how we felt about it in that moment, and really get that out as quickly as we can because time is of the essence.
Mhm.
And after you've had a long day of beer and wine and hot dogs, a lot of people conk out very quickly
Mhm.
after the game. So you've got a short time to really catch that attention span. So I definitely took a few naps after the Super Bowl because of that list. It's
Yeah.
specific.
Well, so which was your personal favorite? Just I would love to hear your perspective given, the business that you're in and the lens that you probably look at these spots through.
This answer has changed so much over the past couple of weeks. So I went in with Workday being my favorite.
Mm.
Um, Mid game, I really loved the NFL spot that placed women at the center.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, the name escapes me, but it was really hinting towards the future of the NFL being
Mhm.
having way more gender parity. And I thought that that was a really good one. And then, of course, Tubi with the surprise with having America thinking that someone had sat on the remote was something that really stuck. But what ended up being my favorite of the night was uh, Rihanna's halftime show. Actually,
Mm,
was the best ad of the night. If you read this really great story from my colleague Rebecca Stewart, she goes into why that particular moment was one of the most resonant ad moments in game, and it wasn't even a traditional ad. It was
mhm,
literally just her singing her hits, her revealing that her family was expanding, which is really cool, and it sort of delving into, well, what's the future of Savage Fenty now that we had what was traditionally an adult space? Is she going into family wear? And there's rumblings of that starting, and then her pulling out that matte compact
mm,
and just dabbing her face for a second. The impressions, the online impressions of that were through the roof with
mhm,
that little moment. And it was just such a good example of a person who is so intertwined with her brand and
mhm,
knows how to bring it to any audience. Even in a
mhm,
place like the Super Bowl where it doesn't feel like it's a natural fit, it
mhm.
totally worked. I don't
Yes.
know that any other person that like has like if Adam Levine during the Maroon 5 show came out with like, "Oh, I've got bottled water now." That wouldn't have made much sense, but
Nope.
her like using that as an opportunity to bring Fenty and Savage Fenty center stage right along with her, brilliant. My
Yeah.
favorite ad moment of the night.
Yeah, I agree. And I thought the same. And what was interesting was I'd been reading people talking about how the NFL does not pay the performers for the halftime show.
Yeah.
However, Rihanna was so clever in how she used the show to very lightly but powerfully integrate her brand into it.
Yeah.
And she can uniquely do that because she is the brand, right? I mean, as you just described with Adam Levine, he's Maroon 5, right? It's not necessarily he is the brand. So,
Exactly.
well, thank you for sharing that. I do have one follow-up question about this.
Yeah.
So when all is said and done with the Super Bowl ads, this year, I believe it was $7 million. The cost was $7 million for a 30-second spot. Is it worth it?
It depends on who you are. I feel like if you are a brand that is synonymous with culture, there's really no other reason for you to spend that much money on that spot, outside of just wanting to be involved in the moment, wanting to
Mhm,
take part in the cultural conversation. Like
mhm,
Pepsi doesn't necessarily need any more brand recognition. Everyone knows what Pepsi is, right?
mhm,
So that $7 million spot is really just a matter of making sure that they are part of an ongoing, everlasting conversation that's going to last weeks. And whether that results in any sort of revenue bump, it remains to be seen. But if you're something like a platform like Timu, which
mm,
is this online commerce platform, I had no clue what Timu was prior to the game. And in
mhm,
terms of like the spot, it was not, in my opinion, it was not a great one for me. It didn't, I'm definitely not the intended audience there, or maybe I am, because right after that, I knew exactly what Timu was because they
mhm,
played it so often during and after the game that I was like, why is Timu doing this? What exactly are they trying to get across? But I end up, pardon me, not only knowing about the brand, but it in terms of like search history,
mhm,
I think it was like oh goodness, I we have data, but I think it was upwards of 700. There was like a 700% bump in searches for Timu post that game. So that $7 million spot ends up being a huge bump in brand recognition. So it ends up being
mhm,
worth it for them.
mhm.
Whereas, like, if you're a brand that everyone knows, I don't know, it's
Yeah.
kind of your mileage may vary there.
Yeah. I mean, that is a really, good point, and I guess it depends is a great answer because as you said, for some people, it's probably well worth it, and maybe for others, not as much. Would
Mhm.
if you like, let's talk a little bit about your newly created role, in the role that you're in now, which is, for Adweek and overseeing creator economy, for Adweek. Can you talk a little bit about why are creators important? Certainly important enough for Adweek to have you in this newly created role. So why are they important for the advertising and marketing industry enough so that Adweek would have somebody come in as the managing editor for that area?
Certainly. I think when it comes to what we understand about marketing, creators are really disrupting our understanding of what marketing is and not just marketing, but good marketing. For a long time, it's been that space, that sort of talent space has been relegated to like your top tier talent. Like it means something when Jennifer Aniston is like in, the front and center for a spot, or if Ben Affleck is, taking orders at Dunkin' with J-Lo coming in. Of course, it's going to catch your attention. But when it
Mhm.
comes to really getting to the heart of your consumers or building community around your consumers, nobody does it better than creators. And
Mhm.
brands and agencies are really starting to realize that they are the access point to new fervent audiences, and they kind of have the keys to cultivating an audience, cultivating brand recognition,
Mhm.
cultivating trust between brand and consumer. Creators kind of have that to kind of have that spark inherently, and it's one of those
Mhm.
things that marketers pay hundreds of thousands of dollars in education to learn. Meanwhile, my next door neighbor, who is 17 and is really great at makeup and has an understanding of sort of the ins and outs of like what her generation understands about makeup,
Mhm.
they're going to have way they're going to have a much better understanding of how to reach that consumer that those brands are so desperately trying to reach. So
Yes.
now they're kind of picking up the ball. If we're keeping with the Super Bowl metaphor, they're picking up the ball and really taking it all the way. And it's really important to understand not just what they can bring to consumers, but like what they can teach marketers.
Yes.
And like there's a flip side to that, because creators can learn so much from marketers, because these creators are now building their own businesses unto themselves. They are their
Mhm.
own, like they're their own entrepreneurs, and
Mhm.
now they're learning how to scale their platforms in this way that really lands and it allows them to expand their audiences, and they've got things that they can learn from the marketing community. So there's this really
Mhm.
cool exchange happening, and now Adweek gets to cover it a little bit more closer to the ground.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because when I think about the point that you're making about how creators have a very good understanding of their audience, it makes an enormous amount of sense because they interact with that audience every day. And
Right,
if you are a good creator who's built an audience, you understand your audience. You understand what
right.
they like. You understand what is going to turn them off. And I have to tell you, one of the things that I seen evolve in this space because, we've been in the influencer and creator space since 2008. And back then, we would like the influencers would basically get like a press release. They'd be inundated with these press releases. Hey, this is what we want you to say about our product. We'll pay you, but this is what we want you to say, to where we are, I think, today, which is much more of an understanding that it has to be a marriage of you influencer creator understand the audience, your audience. We
Right,
understand on the brand side what we're trying to convey. How do we make that come to life for your audience? But it has to be that partnership. And I think that what's happened since COVID, where the brands started looking at influencers also and creators for their content as the value of that content beyond just, oh, you're going to do a post for us and you
mhm,
have the audience. They were starting to see that they couldn't do those expensive shoots that maybe they were doing before, the brands, but
right,
now they could you these the creators, some of their content is just as beautiful as content you would go out and do a very expensive shoot for. So this evolution that maybe COVID hastened
right,
because we were in a situation where brands couldn't go send a crew to go create some big production. the influencers and creators really took on that role. And I think you've seen a big evolution just in the last few years of
Mhm.
how brands are turning to creators and what they're turning to them for. So
Yeah,
it's
exactly it.
I just think the space has evolved. It's continuing to evolve, but it's evolved so much in the recent past. I'd be interested too if you could talk. Let's take a step back, maybe, and talk about your career and get a better understanding. Did you always know that you wanted to be a writer and go into journalism? How did you get started in your career?
First of all, there's a big no on that one. I didn't had no clue that I was going to go into journalism and writing. I mean, I feel like when I was in college, there was this big question mark about what I was going to do. I knew, I came in as like this theater kid, and I knew I wanted to connect with people. I knew I wanted to help with people, wanted to help people. And I went with a degree in psychology, and I left going into healthcare, into first Medicaid and then private health insurance. And I
Mhm.
did that for a long time, until I felt like I needed to tap into something creatively,
Mhm.
and I took a hard pivot. Now, before I
Mhm.
did that, I was really into comic books and video games, and I felt like I had a very unique perspective that I really wasn't seeing. And I had connected with three of my friends to create a space for ourselves where we can talk about nerd culture from the perspective of Black women,
Mm.
and most of us who identify as queer. And we called it Nerds of Prey, and we were really proud of it. And we'd shaped that for 3 years. And through that, I was able to go into cultural criticism. It allowed me
Mhm.
to build a platform where I can parlay my love of something into a reason as to why, these whatever opinions I had were indication of like where the industry needed to go and move forward. And
Mm.
through I was able to do that through Hello Giggles, and I was able to do that through the AV Club, and in tandem learn about journalism and understand what it means to convey this information in a trustworthy way. So I was learning about journalism actively while I was
Mhm.
also learning about cultural criticism and sort of journeying out as a freelancer. And from there, one of those freelancer gigs was with Adweek, because
Mm.
one of who I consider one of my greatest mentors, David Griner, realized that this love of entertainment and also this understanding of culturally what it needs to do in order to connect to greater audiences, he realized that there was a way to translate that into
Mm.
creative advertising and
Mm.
sort of applying that same lens to marketing.
Yeah.
So under his tutelage and under the tutelage of Doug Zanger, I was able to sort of learn how to translate all of that while still learning about the tenets of journalism and meld all of that into coverage that worked with Adweek. And I loved Adweek so much that when I did finally get a full-time job as an editor at the AV Club, because I was doing freelancing editing as well, I made it a stipulation that I had to be able to continue to work with Adweek
Mm.
as a freelancer. I would not recommend that, by the way. It's not,
Sounds like you had a full-time job and more than that.
yes, and like raising a daughter. And I was like, definitely stick to the one job if you can do it. But it was an opportunity for me to stay connected to this world that I was deeply interested in. And so that was kind of the roundabout way that I went into the current emotive journalism that I'm in, and I'm finding that that's aligning with a lot of creatives in marketing or marketers in general. A lot of creative marketers didn't set out to get into marketing. It was something that kind of caught them by surprise. So I feel like it's kinsman in that way, that all of these creatives kind of landed in this space and fell in love with it, and that's just kind of how I came about it as well.
It's interesting because one of the things I've noticed about editors, journalists who are good at what they do, there's this common theme that they're really good storytellers. And when you mentioned that you were involved in theater, you
Yeah,
said you were a theater kid. I
yeah, I
thought to
was.
myself, I've got a theater kid and she's a great storyteller. And I have seen the way that they have this ability to kind of translate what's on paper to a visual story, right, on
Right.
stage, let's say. But I wonder if there's a connection there from way back to your theater kid roots, that this was all kind of being planted as seeds.
Probably, like, it really all falls into just a deep abiding love of good storytelling,
Yeah.
and that's sort of the guiding principle in terms of what I turn to when it comes to the creative that I really love to amplify.
Mhm.
All good advertising, I think, gets a certain point across. You get your product across, you
Mhm.
use the sum of all of the talents that work under your
Mhm.
brand or your agency. But at the end of the day, if it tells a good story,
Mm.
it doesn't matter whether or not your product is in the forefront or in the background.
Yeah.
It ends up propelling whatever message that you feel is necessary. And that's I feel like all of my favorite ads, some of the stuff that really stuck with me over the years, didn't really have a ton of product placement in the forefront. It was
Yeah.
all about just all that storytelling. So maybe when I was like on stage, warbling out whatever notes I could, that was probably the starting point of all this, and I didn't realize it. Yeah, but
Mhm.
you're absolutely right. I think what's really connected a lot of me and my colleagues is just our love of storytelling at the end of the day.
Yeah. Well, I want to delve into the other part of your job that we have not talked as much about, which is, or we have not talked about at all yet, which is that you are also managing editor for DEI at
Yeah.
Adweek, the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion. And I want to start with asking you how the advertising industry has approached DEI, and if you're seeing things changing.
I feel like I can be candid here. I feel like where we are now, um, for as long as we've been talking about inclusion, for as long as we've been talking about DEI, it's still very surface how
Mhm.
the marketing community is approaching DEI. We're making incremental changes, and I'm galvanized by those changes. I feel like we
Mhm.
weren't where we are. We weren't where we were even 5 years ago when it
Mhm.
comes to the creative that is coming across my proverbial desk. If you look at like the things that Apple and Amazon have done, Microsoft in the terms of the accessibility space and putting forth really awesome creative that puts
Mhm.
disabled communities front and center. That's
Mhm.
something that I think we're seeing more of, that we're
Mhm.
seeing more brands kind of understand that accessibility is necessary.
Mhm.
But I feel like there isn't enough of a relationship with people who have been sort of on the ground and fighting this fight for a long time.
Yeah.
And I'm talking about people outside of marketing, people that
Mhm.
like are your disability advocates,
Mhm.
people who have been really working towards changing culture
Yeah.
in a way that makes just the world more accessible. There's still a little bit of an absence there, and
Yeah.
making sure that the the brand perspective goes beyond any single campaign. I've had so many talks with Dr. Josh Lebner over at Wonderman Thompson, and advocates like creator Amani Barbarin and Melissa Thompson, who have such key insights on how brands and agencies and just the marketing ecosystem at large can really connect with not just disabled communities, but all marginalized communities. And it starts by making sure that they're integrated in every process. It starts really with employment,
Yeah.
with really making sure that you're not just saying that you care, but saying like, we care so much that we want to make sure that we are working directly with these communities and not on a temporary basis, but we want them on our team. We want them leading. We want them really having power. That's where I think we're starting to have those conversations. I would like to see more movement in that. But I do think that there is still incremental change happening, especially in the accessibility, where they're at least understanding that that's a part of it.
Yeah.
And it's reassuring. I think that even 5 years from now, we're gonna be saying like, "Oh, man, look at how far we've come."
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's little pardon me, little change every once.
Yeah. Well, and I guess, it takes some time to turn something that has been a machine for so long, right? The
Right.
advertising marketing industry. But, even simple things like, I many years ago I started my career at American Express, which was back then traditional, and it was considered a very male oriented brand.
Mhm.
And when you looked at the team that was creating the advertising. And once they recognize that, you know what, wow, women are actually making decisions about which credit card the family should get. Maybe we should include women in our advertising. They didn't have women who were creating the ads. You know, it
Right.
took time to evolve that. But, you know, it's just something, I think just that simple example for me made it so clear that if you want to be able to appeal to a diverse customer base, you better have diversity in terms of the people who are actually working to create those marketing and advertising campaigns.
1,000%. And I think that that's another indication of change in this industry as well. Is like for a long time, a part of that sort of archaic language was general market versus multicultural market. And now we're having a lot more conversations about how the multicultural market is the general market. And
Mhm,
that has been largely powered by creatives of
mhm.
color. And we're starting to see sort of a better understanding of what it means to sort of break down that wall and really redefine what general market means. I look a lot towards this creative agency out from Atlanta called Majority.
Mhm.
And the reason they're called Majority is that because one of the reasons is that they make it a mandate that 75% of their staff come from diverse backgrounds.
Mhm.
And they basically it starts with saying, okay, we need to make sure that a majority of our staff is non-white, and they're taking that by flipping what was the old model, which
Yeah.
was the old model was making sure that 25%
Mm.
were came from diverse backgrounds, and they're
Mhm.
saying we could flip that and
Yeah.
totally change what general market means. And they're putting out some incredibly stellar work, and I think that there's other areas of marketing that are really starting to catch on. So I'm really excited to watch this space over the next like 5 years. I really do predict that in 5 years we are going to see such sweeping change,
Mm.
um just because there is already these seeds being planted by these incredible uh sort of pioneers in that realm.
Yeah.
And it'll be exciting to see like what catches on and
Yeah.
how different the space looks.
Well, maybe that leads me to our next question, which you're just answering. But is what do you see as the biggest change that's coming to the advertising industry in the next few years? Is it what you just talked about?
Most definitely. I think that there is going to be a larger conversation about what it means to be a general marketer and why that idea was so steeped in something systemic that just no longer works.
Mhm.
Our understanding of the world around us has changed so drastically that we understand that the majority has shifted,
Yeah.
and because of that, you have to speak to what the culture is now.
Yeah.
And if you don't, you're going to find yourself left behind. I think that with that greater understanding, um, the marketing ecosystem is going to have to catch up out of
Yeah.
necessity, and the work is going to flourish because of that. Because
Yeah.
now when you have a better understanding of the world around you, you have a better understanding of how that feeds your creativity, and it just makes
Mm.
objectively better work. And I
Mm.
think that with that conversation really taking hold, that's going to be the starting point, the catalyst of the change that we're going to see in the next few years.
You know, as you were just saying that, Shannon, and I've talked to a lot of people in the advertising space, and I think that you're raising a point that I had not really, that just kind of crystallized in my mind as you were speaking. It's almost as if what needs to happen and what may be starting to happen is, as marketers and advertisers, we need to stop thinking about consumers as demographics, like what's your ethnic background, what's your religion, what's your, what is, what are those things, but think about it more as psychographics. So moving from like demographics to psychographics, which are more of like what is the common thing in terms of, how you think about things, how you think about the world. And I wonder if we can make that shift, if that is what helps us make our marketing, our advertising efforts more successful.
I think it's a mix of both. I think that you definitely want to shift into those like sort of like the common truths. I look at McDonald's a lot. They build a lot of their strategy around these fan truths, these unifying things that create experiences that are shared across demographics. You also have to think about demographics in a sense of making sure that no one is left behind in this cultural conversation.
Right.
So you have these truths, these inherent truths that connect us while still simultaneously thinking about, okay, who are we bringing along for the ride? Are we bringing along as many people for the ride while we're creating this work? And if you stay in those two mindsets, I think you'll go extremely far. So it's a good mix of both.
Yeah. Well, my last question for you, Shannon, is one that I love ending the Powerhouse Women show with. And that is what you wish you could tell the young Shannon that was just starting out in her career.
That's a really good question. I think it's probably the best question I've ever been asked. I used to beat myself up a lot for realizing things a little bit what I felt was too late. Especially when you come up in college, it seems like you're surrounded by so many people who have a great understanding of where they're going to go when they're like 19. And it took quite some time for me to realize that in a lot of instances, that's just not true. Or you can have things figured out as soon as you hit campus or as soon as you leave campus, or even when you hit like your mid-20s and you say, this is my career, this is where I'm going, and eye on the prize. And then in just like a moment's notice, with the flap of a butterfly wing, everything can change for you. And you can decide, like, maybe this person that I thought I was isn't exactly who I am. And I kind of came to that in my 30s. And not just with my career, but realizing, that I, was queer, realizing that, like, oh, this is who I am as a mother. This is who I am as a daughter, as a wife. And I used to kind of beat myself up for realizing it too late. I would tell younger me that your timeline is your timeline. Your journey is your journey. And wherever you arrive is right on time. And you are exactly who you're supposed to be in that moment to get there. There's so much pressure for us to just have an understanding of who we are in 10, 15, 20 years, and it's not sustainable. We are shifting, evolving human beings. You could decide when you're 60 that I'm learning about myself and I'm going to be someone completely new today, and I'm going to start a career, and that's okay.
Yeah.
So that's what I would tell her, is your timeline and your journey are just that. And you're exactly where you need to be at the exact right moment, exactly as you are.
Oh, Shannon, I love that. And it also is about giving yourself grace. I think as women, we can be pretty hard on ourselves,
Yeah.
and look back and think, why did I do that? Why did I do that? Why did I do that? And this notion of you're where you need to be. It's your journey. And you are exactly where you need to be is such a gift to think about life that way.
It is. Like, we don't know at that moment that we know what we're doing, but we know what we're doing. We know what's best for us. It's a thing that we've been criticized about forever, right? Men follow their heads and women follow their hearts. But at the end of the day, what has always won out for me is sticking to my intuition, sticking with my heart, and just going with my gut. And these things that I've been criticized for just by the virtue of being a woman are my superpower. And that's the things that I'm going to lean into. So all those things that like have been hurled at us as insults, we just need to look at them and say, thank you.
Yes.
It's going to get me far, and just trust in our process. We know what we're doing, even if we don't feel like we do.
Right. Even if we're not conscious of it at the time, we're doing what we're doing for the right reasons at that time.
Yeah. You got this, and we got this.
Shannon Miller, I am so happy that we had this chance to chat today. And what wonderful insights. Thank you for spending this time with us. I'm so grateful.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for including me in such a stellar group of women. I think that this show is just so killer. So to be on it is an honor. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day.
You too. Have a good one.